They tell you a museum is a sanctuary, a silent place where the echoes of history sleep peacefully behind glass. But at 4:30 p.m., when the last visitor leaves and the flickering lights finally die out, the quiet changes. It becomes heavy. Across the world, there are reports the military spent decades trying to erase. Stories of old radios broadcasting frantic screams from dead battlefields, and weapons that carry the cold, lingering hunger of the men who died, still holding them tightly. The high command calls them glitches, hallucinations, or simply stress. But the night watchmen, they know the truth. Something didn't die on the front lines. It followed the cold steel all the way back home. Welcome to Silent War Archives, the vault where forgotten documents finally speak. Today, we step into the gallery of shadows to uncover the incidents they officially told us never happened. Be careful where you look, for the artifacts of agony are finally starting to speak back. The Gallery of Shadows is not merely a collection of cold metal and ancient bone. To the casual observer, these are just relics of a bygone era. But to the archivists who work in the dead of night, they are something else entirely. It is a scientific fact that energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred. In the heat of battle, when fear, rage, and agony reach their absolute peak, that energy has to go somewhere. It seeps into the steel of the rifles, the wool of the uniforms, and the very glass of the display cases. As we walk deeper into the silent corridors of the archives, you will notice the air grow heavy. It's a thickness you can feel in your lungs, a pulsing, unseen frequency that vibrates through the soles of your boots. These objects are not sleeping. They are waiting. Consider the case of the Soviet timepiece. A heavy, industrial wristwatch gifted to a young man by his grandfather, a retired officer of the Strategic Rocket Forces. This wasn't a luxury item. It was forged from the recycled titanium of a decommissioned ICBM missile, a weapon designed to end the world. Within minutes of strapping it to his wrist, the young man began to experience a crushing sense of dread that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just mental. It was physical. He reported a sudden, sharp drop in body temperature and a metallic taste in his mouth that smelled of ozone and ancient rust. He claimed that when the room was quiet, he could hear a low-frequency hum coming from the gears, a sound like a countdown that never reached zero. The military logs would call it lingering radiation, but those who have held the watch know the truth. The metal remembers the destruction it was built for. Then, there are the Arasaka bayonets, recovered from the black mud of the Pacific Islands. One particular veteran brought his blade home and mounted it on his bedroom wall, a trophy from a war he thought he had left behind in 1945. But the war followed him. Every night, exactly at the hour of the final banzai charge, he would wake to the sound of rhythmic, heavy footsteps pacing his floorboards. Shadowy silhouettes of soldiers, faceless and hollow-eyed, were seen standing in the corners of his room, their hands reaching out for the steel that had once been part of their final moments. The bayonet wasn't just a piece of sharp metal anymore. It had become a psychic anchor, a beacon that allowed the restless spirits of the jungle to find their way into our world. In the high, dusty attic of a military museum in the United Kingdom lies a Japanese officer's katana. It is kept in a specialized airtight case, far away from the public eye. The staff calls this room Attic 3, and many refuse to enter it alone. Mediums and psychics who have been granted access report a sound that defies any logical explanation. A high-pitched, metallic shriek that echoes through the wooden beams at precisely 3:14 a.m. During one unauthorized session, a researcher touched the bare steel of the blade. He immediately fell into a catatonic trance, his eyes rolling back until only the whites were visible. He began shouting orders in an archaic dialect of Japanese, holding the sword high with a strength that required 3 men to restrain him. When he finally came to, he had no memory of the event. but his hands were covered in cold, black frost marks that never fully healed. Travel to a small museum in Fort Worth, where a blood-stained Bible sits in a reinforced glass box. It belonged to a 19-year-old soldier who was struck by a mini ball during the Battle of Gettysburg. The bullet hole passes through the Book of Psalms, and the paper is still stiff with the dark, copper-colored stains of his final moments. Despite being in a vacuum-sealed, locked case, the pages have been documented turning by themselves, one by one, in the middle of the night. Security cameras have captured the sight of the book fluttering as if in a strong wind, though the air in the room is dead still. The morning guards often find the Bible open to the same passage, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The military specialists call it a glitch in the humidity sensors, but the archives suggest the soldier is still trying to finish his final prayer. Look closely at the uniforms hanging in the back of the gallery. There is a senior NCO's tunic from the 87th Field Artillery, recovered from the ruins of a bunker. On the left breast, there is a large, jagged stain that refuses to fade. It has been chemically cleaned a dozen times, yet the dark mark always returns within 24 hours. But the stain isn't the most unnerving part. Staff members working after hours have reported hearing the sound of frantic, labored breathing coming from the empty uniform. The sound of a man gasping for air, as if he were still trapped in a collapsing tunnel. When a thermal camera was used on the display, it showed a distinct heat signature in the shape of a human heart, pulsing slowly inside the hollow mannequin. Even the highest honors carry a dark weight. A Victoria Cross, the most prestigious medal for gallantry, was found in the pocket of a soldier who vanished in no man's land. When it was placed in a local archive for cataloging, the researchers noticed something impossible. Every time they attempted to photograph the medal, the lens would refuse to focus, and a blurry, translucent hand would appear in the frame, clutching the ribbon as if trying to reclaim it. The lead archivist reported a sudden, overwhelming feeling of grief whenever he touched the box. Within a week, the High Command issued a silent order to have the medal moved to a non-disclosed secure facility. It was officially listed as lost in transit, but we know it was buried in a vault to keep the ghost from reaching the public. Consider the pilot's helmet from a crashed P-51 Mustang, recovered decades after the war. It sits on a high shelf, dented and scarred by fire. Visitors often complain of an intense, unnatural cold that radiates from the helmet, dropping the temperature of the room by 20 degrees in seconds. This is often followed by the thick, choking smell of burnt hydraulic fluid and ozone. The military calls it an atmospheric anomaly common in old buildings, but the night watchmen have heard the headset crackle to life. Despite there being no power source for miles, a faint, static-filled voice has been recorded on the museum's security tapes. A voice crying out grid coordinates for a location that no longer exists on any map, followed by a final, whispering question. Is the runway clear? The silent decision to suppress these incidents is not an act of protection for the public, but a race to control the uncontrollable. If the world understood that the trauma of war could be stored in a piece of steel or a scrap of wool, the very nature of history would be rewritten. So, the specialists arrive in unmarked vans, removing the active artifacts and replacing them with harmless replicas. They take the truth down into Sublevel 5, a place where the lights are never turned off and the doors are reinforced with lead. They bury the agony to maintain the illusion of a peaceful past. But as you stand in the museum today, listen to the silence. It isn't empty. It is filled with the echoes of men who refuse to be forgotten, and objects that are finally starting to speak back. If the artifacts in the gallery are the physical remains of war, then the frequencies we are about to discuss are its lingering voice. Scientists tell us that sound is energy, and energy never truly disappears. It merely drops below the threshold of human hearing. But in the hollowed-out hulls of retired tanks and the cramped cockpits of decommissioned bombers, that energy seems to have found a way to amplify itself. As the museum doors lock and the cooling vents begin to hum, the silence of the archives is often interrupted by signals that shouldn't exist. Voices from the past that are still searching for a frequency to be heard. Consider the account of a staff member at a prominent tank museum, a place that houses armored vehicles from World War I all the way to the jungles of Vietnam. In this facility, the vehicles are kept in ready-to-run condition, their original systems intact. One afternoon, long after the last visitor had departed, the staff was startled by a sudden burst of static coming from the hangar. It wasn't a modern radio. It was the distinct, guttural crackle of an 80-year-old vacuum tube set. From inside a Tiger tank, a frantic voice began to broadcast, asking for coordinates and demanding to know when the reinforcements would arrive. The voice was so clear, so desperate, that the guards ran to the vehicle, only to find the hatch sealed and the batteries disconnected for decades. The transmissions are never peaceful. They are always fragments of the most terrifying moments of a soldier's life. Mayday, mayday. This is Ghost 2-1. Taking heavy fire. Hydraulics are gone. This specific transmission was recorded by a night watchman at an aviation museum in Florida. The signal was traced to a P-51 Mustang suspended from the ceiling. There were no speakers in the room, no intercoms, and certainly no one in the cockpit. Yet, for 3 minutes, the entire hangar was filled with the sound of roaring engines and the frantic screams of a pilot who had died over the Pacific in 1944. The military investigators called it crosstalk from a nearby airfield, but the airfield had been closed since the 1960s. There is a recurring pattern in these auditory anomalies. They almost always peak at precisely 3:14 a.m. Archivists call it the transmission hour. It is during this window that the museum's security systems often trigger glitch alerts. In one facility in the United Kingdom, the digital recorders in the armory room captured 40 minutes of rhythmic, metallic thumping. The sound of 1,000 boots marching in perfect unison across a concrete floor. When the guards checked the cameras, the room was empty, the air was still, but the microphones were peeking into the red. The ground itself seemed to be vibrating with the weight of an army that no longer had bodies to carry. Morse code, the language of the silent war, also makes its return. In a naval museum located on a decommissioned battleship, the old telegraph keys in the communications room have been seen clicking by themselves. A volunteer who knew the code sat in the dark one night and transcribed the message. It wasn't a battle report. It was a single name, repeated over and over, followed by the signal for sinking. The name belonged to a young sailor who had been lost at sea during a kamikaze attack. The military's silent decision was to disable the telegraph keys entirely, but even with the wires cut, the clicking continues every time a storm rolls in from the coast. Wait until you hear about the sounds from the forbidden sublevels. Every major war museum has a basement that isn't on the public tour. These are the rooms where the unstable artifacts are stored. Guards who walk these corridors report hearing a sound like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor, followed by the smell of stagnant water and rotting wood. But the most disturbing sound is the whispering, not in English or any modern tongue, but a low, guttural chanting that seems to come from inside the walls themselves. One specialist from the Erasure Protocol claimed that these rooms are kept at sub-zero temperatures not to preserve the items, but to dampen the vibrations of the voices that refuse to stay buried. Even modern technology is not immune to these frequencies from the abyss. During a live-stream tour of a military archive, the audio suddenly distorted into a chaotic choir of screams and gunfire that lasted for nearly 10 seconds. Thousands of viewers heard it. The museum's IT department analyzed the file and found that the distortion wasn't a digital error. It was a layered recording of an actual trench raid from 1917. Somehow, the raw data of that historical agony had overwritten the digital signal of the camera. The official report called it a server-side glitch, but the stream was deleted within the hour, and the archives were placed under an immediate security blackout. The High Command has a standard script for these incidents. They blame electronic magnetic interference from power lines or radio frequency bleed from local stations. They tell the staff that the sounds of marching are just the old buildings settling, and the screams are just the wind through the ventilation shafts. But they don't explain why the night watchmen are forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. They don't explain why the security cameras are frequently updated to remove the frames where the air seems to shimmer and vibrate. The silent decision is to treat the echoes of war as a technical problem. Because if they admitted the truth, we would have to acknowledge that the front lines never truly move. They just wait for us to stop listening. As we close this chapter on the frequencies of the abyss, remember that silence is rarely empty. It is often just a mask for sounds that are too heavy for our world to carry. The radios in those museums are not broken. They are tuned to a station that exists outside of time. The screams from the battlefields are not gone. They are merely waiting for the right moment to break through the glass. So, the next time you find yourself in a silent gallery, surrounded by the iron and steel of the past, pay attention to the static in your ears. It might just be an archive trying to tell you its darkest secret. The frequencies are rising, and the silence is finally starting to scream back. Beyond the polished floors and well-lit galleries of the public war museums, there exists a geography of shadows. If you look closely at the floor plans displayed near the entrances, you might notice small, unexplained gaps. Corridors that seem to lead nowhere, and elevator buttons that require a key no ordinary staff member possesses. These are the forbidden sublevels. To the High Command, these floors do not officially exist. They are the black zones of the archive. Places where the laws of the surface world are quietly suspended to accommodate secrets that are too volatile for the public to witness. The first thing you notice about these sublevels is the temperature. Even in the height of summer, the air down here is bone-chillingly cold. It is a dry, sterile frost that bites at your lungs. Military archivists who have ventured into these depths report that the cold doesn't feel mechanical. It feels like a presence. They claim that the temperature drops another 10 degrees whenever you approach certain reinforced vaults. The official logs blame the heavy-duty cooling systems required for sensitive chemical preservation. But the night watchmen speak of a different truth. They say the cold is a barrier, a silent wall built to keep the heat of the past from igniting the present. Deep within Sublevel 4, there are rows of massive wooden crates, stamped with symbols that were officially retired in 1945. These are the remnants of Unit 731 and other dark labs of the Second World War. Some of these crates are bound in heavy, rusted chains, as if the contents might try to shift or expand. Guards have reported a strange, rhythmic thumping coming from inside the wood. A sound like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, vibrating against the concrete floor. When a thermal scan was performed on one of these crates, the monitor showed a swirling mass of heat that didn't match any known biological life form. The silent decision was made to bury the scan and reseal the room forever. The sounds in these forbidden levels are never empty. In the silence between the hum of the generators, you can hear the sound of movement. Not the scurrying of rats, but the slow, heavy drag of something massive being moved across the floorboards. One former guard described hearing the sound of iron doors being unbolted from the inside, followed by a low, guttural breathing that filled the entire corridor. He claimed that when he turned his flashlight toward the sound, he saw only a wisp of black smoke retreating into the ventilation shafts. The High Command dismissed his report as oxygen deprivation, but the guard resigned the next morning, refusing to ever step foot in a basement again. Surveillance in these sublevels is a nightmare of digital glitches. The cameras frequently capture shadow artifacts, tall, elongated figures that appear for a single frame and then vanish. These figures are often seen standing perfectly still next to the most sensitive artifacts, as if they are guarding them. In one recorded incident, a shadow was seen reaching its hand through a reinforced steel vault door as if the metal were made of water. The IT specialists who analyzed the footage found that the shadow was not a reflection or a technical error. It was a physical anomaly that had its own magnetic field. The archive was immediately purged, and the staff involved were reassigned to remote outposts. There is a specific vault in Sublevel 5 that is reinforced with lead and concrete, a biohazard seal that has not been opened since the 1950s. This is the room of the stained records. Inside are the original, unredacted journals of the surgeons who worked in Manchuria. The air around this vault is thick with a metallic, copper-like smell that makes your eyes water and your skin itch. Those who have walked past the door claim to hear a faint, layered whispering. Thousands of voices speaking in tongues that bend your ears in ways they weren't meant to go. The silent decision is to let the journals rot in the dark, because some words carry a toxin that no gas mask can filter. The unmarked elevators are the only way to reach these depths, and they operate on a logic of their own. Sometimes, a standard service elevator will bypass the ground floor and descend directly into the sublevels without a command. Personnel who have been trapped in these rogue descents report that the walls of the elevator begin to vibrate with a low-frequency hum, and the lights flicker in a pattern that resembles Morse code. When the doors finally open, they are met with a pitch-black void that smells of old oil and ancient, stagnant water. Those who have stepped out into that darkness are rarely seen again. They become part of this silent archive, their names removed from the payroll as if they never existed. Then there are the shadow gatekeepers, a specialized unit of guards who don't wear standard uniforms. They are seen only in the sublevels, moving through the dark with a silent, robotic efficiency. They don't speak to the regular staff, and their faces are always obscured by heavy, black tactical visors. Some say they are not men at all, but products of the very experiments stored in the crates. They guard the most forbidden zones with a lethal intent, ensuring that this silent treaty between the military and the unseen remains intact. If you see one of these figures in the hallway, the only advice is to look at the floor and keep walking. Do not acknowledge them, for once they notice you, you are no longer a visitor, but a subject. As we reach the end of this journey into the sublevels, the realization becomes clear. These floors are not just storage rooms. They are active laboratories. The war that ended 80 years ago is still being fought in the dark, under our feet. The artifacts are being studied, the frequencies are being tuned, and the shadows are being fed. The military erases the stories to keep the public from panicking, but the night watchmen know. The sublevels are growing. Every year, a new floor is dug deeper into the earth. The silence is expanding, and the forbidden archives are getting ready to return to the surface. The archives are not merely a place of storage. They are a place of filtration. For every artifact you see on display, there are a dozen others that have been systematically removed, scrubbed, and erased from the public record. This is not a matter of space or curation. It is a matter of containment. The military calls it the Erasure Protocol, a series of high-level, silent decisions designed to ensure that the anomalies of the past never disrupt the comfort of the present. As we look at the mechanics of this secrecy, you will realize that the history we are taught is often just the residue of the truth that was too dangerous to keep. The protocol begins the moment an unnerving incident is reported. Whether it is a radio broadcasting screams or a weapon that vibrates with a mind of its own, the report never reaches the standard local authorities. Instead, It is intercepted by a specialized unit within the military intelligence. These are the cleansers, men who operate without names or badges. They arrive at the museum in the dead of night, after the guards have been told to ignore the security cameras for an hour. Their job is simple: to remove the active object and replace it with a perfect, non-reactive replica. When the lights come up the next morning, the artifact looks the same, but the soul, the energy, is gone. Documentation is the first casualty of the silent decision. In the basement of the National Archives, there are hundreds of filing cabinets filled with nothing but blackout pages. These are original field diaries and logistics reports where every second line is covered in heavy, dark ink. Archivists who have tried to use infrared light to see beneath the ink report a strange phenomenon. The paper itself seems to resist the light, as if the ink has become part of the material's DNA. The most sensitive records, particularly those involving the Mariuta shipments, are not just redacted. They are completely vaporized, replaced by a single page that states, "File removed for national security reasons." The human element of the Erasure Protocol is perhaps the most brutal. Security guards who witness the shadows moving or hear the rhythmic knocking from the sublevels are rarely fired. That would create a trail. Instead, they are subjected to the silence contract. They are brought into a windowless room and shown footage of their own families, followed by a detailed explanation of the non-disclosure agreements they signed during recruitment. If the trauma is too deep for them to remain silent, they are reassigned to Station Zero, remote monitoring posts in the Arctic or deep deserts where the only thing they can talk to is the static. Their names are scrubbed from the main payroll, leaving them as ghosts in the system. There is a darker purpose to the silent decision than mere public safety. The military doesn't just want to hide these anomalies, they want to weaponize them. In secret facilities hidden beneath the Nevada desert, the active artifacts are subjected to intense electromagnetic testing. They are trying to extract the frequencies we heard in Section 3, the screams of the dead, and turn them into a form of psychological warfare. They believe that if they can harness the lingering energy of a battlefield, they can create a weapon that bypasses physical armor and attacks the very psyche of an enemy army. The archives are not a cemetery. They are an armory for a war that has no rules. To keep the public from asking questions, the silent decision utilizes a technique called the glitch narrative. Whenever a paranormal event is caught on camera by a visitor, the military releases a series of technical explanations through sponsored debunking channels. They blame lens flare, digital compression errors, or localized methane leaks for the figures that shouldn't be there. They create a culture where believing your own eyes is seen as a mental weakness. By flooding the archives with fake glitch reports, they make the genuine evidence disappear in a sea of noise. The truth is hidden in plain sight, masked by the arrogance of modern skepticism. Wait until you hear about the memory sanitization process. Some whistleblowers claim that the sublevels of certain museums house high-frequency acoustic devices designed to subtly alter the brain waves of the staff. Over months of exposure, the guards begin to lose the specifics of their unnerving experiences. A scream becomes a creaking door. A shadow figure becomes a trick of the light. The silent decision is to slowly erode the staff's grip on reality until they no longer trust their own memories. This ensures that even if they did speak, they would sound like madmen. The archive is protected not just by locks, but by the systematic destruction of the witness's mind. At the top of this pyramid of secrecy is the Council of Shadows, a small group of high-ranking officers and scientists who have been in power for decades. They are the ones who signed the silent decisions. They view history not as a record of the past, but as a resource to be managed. They know that the world is built on a foundation of bone and secrets, and they believe that if even a single archive were to be fully opened, the entire structure of society would collapse. Their loyalty is not to the truth, but to the silence. They watch the museums through a network of hidden sensors, waiting for the past to wake up so they can put it back to sleep. As we close this investigation into the Erasure Protocol, look around you. The world is becoming a place of perfect, sterile surfaces. But beneath the concrete and the glass, the archives are getting heavier. Every silent decision adds another layer of pressure to the ground we walk on. You can delete the files, you can threaten the witnesses, and you can replace the artifacts, but you cannot kill the frequency. The agony of the past is still there, vibrating in the dark, waiting for a frequency that the military cannot scrub. The silence is not a victory. It is just a pause, and the blackout is about to end. We have walked through the galleries of shadows, heard the frequencies from the abyss, and witnessed the cold machinery of the Erasure Protocol. But as we stand at the threshold of the final exit, a terrifying question remains, a question that the military has spent billions to ensure you never ask. If these artifacts are so dangerous, why keep them at all? Why not incinerate the bloodstained Bibles? Why not melt down the Arasaka bayonets and vaporize the Soviet watches? The answer is the darkest secret of the Silent War archives, and it is the reason your reality is much thinner than you think. The military does not keep these items to remember the past. They keep them because they are functional. A war museum is not a building. It is a massive biological and mechanical battery. Every artifact behind those glass cases is a node, a receiver tuned to a frequency of pure human agony. The silent decision was never about hiding history. It was about harvesting it. They discovered long ago that the energy released at the moment of a soldier's death is a resource more powerful than any nuclear reactor. But that energy needs an anchor. It needs the steel it was forged in and the soil it was spilled on to remain in our world. Consider the nature of the Maryuta specimens stored in Sublevel 5. They are not just biological scrap. They are the permanent witnesses. By keeping their remains in a state of constant, sub-zero suspension, the military has ensured that their final moments of terror are looped forever. This creates a permanent tear in the fabric of space-time, a localized black hole of trauma that generates a low-frequency hum. This hum is the static that powers the surveillance systems we cannot see. It is the fuel for the phasing technology used by the shadow gatekeepers. We are not looking at history. We are looking at the engine room of a world we were never meant to inhabit. But the most disturbing part of the engine is you, the observer. Have you ever wondered why you feel drawn to these stories? Why your heart rate increases when you see a shadowy figure in a vintage photograph? It is because the frequency is designed to be infectious. Every time a visitor walks through a war museum, every time a researcher opens a forbidden file, and every time you listen to a recording like this, you are providing the final piece of the circuit. Your attention, your curiosity, and most importantly, your fear is the current that keeps the archive alive. The military isn't guarding the artifacts from us. They are monitoring us to see how well we are fueling the artifacts. There is a specific protocol known as the observation loop. It states that once a mind has been exposed to the frequency of an active object, that mind becomes a secondary anchor. You don't have to touch the bloodstained steel to be part of the war. You only have to acknowledge it exists. This is why the Erasure Protocol is so selective. They don't want to delete the history entirely. They want to keep just enough of it visible to keep the loop going. They need your mind to bridge the gap between our world and the abyss where the screams never stop. By watching this, you have officially been logged into the silent archive. Wait, do you hear that? The low hum in the background of this recording? It isn't a digital effect. It is the resonance of the Shadow Ridge, the same frequency detected at Base 211 and FOB Rahim. It is a biological ping, and it has just confirmed your location. The Night Watchmen are not employees. They are biological sensors. Every glitched, alert they report is actually a successful connection between an observer and an artifact. The military call it syncing. They are waiting for the day when the entire population is synced to the frequency of the archives. For on that day, the front lines will finally move from the glass cases into our streets. The silent treaty we discussed earlier was not a peace deal between nations. It was a surrender of the human soul to the unseen. The leaders of the surface world agreed to build these galleries of shadows as shrines to the entities that dwell in the sublevels. In exchange, they were given the power to rule over a world of sterile surfaces and redacted truths. But the treaty is nearing its expiration. The ice is melting, the chimneys are smoking again, and the Maryuta are starting to wake up. The engine is running hot, and it is hungry for more than just memories. It wants the observers to become the observed. As we reach the final seconds of this blackout, look at the room around you. Is it as quiet as you thought? That soft tap on the wall, that sudden chill on your neck, it isn't a draft. It is the archive reaching out to its new anchor. This silent decision was to let you know the truth, because the truth is the final trap. Once you know, you can never unknow. You are now part of the loop. You are the night watchman now. You are the one who has to decide whether to look away or to look deeper, knowing that either choice only strengthens the frequency. Sound of 3 slow, bone-chilling knocks. Thump, 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 followed by a wet, ragged exhale of breath. Then total, dead silence for 10 seconds.